Welcome to Three Witches and a Druid podcast, a Canadian podcast about paganism in today's modern society. And now, Three Witches and a Druid podcast present the Bard Dove.
Hey ho, who is there? Hello, and welcome back to Three Witches and a Druid, where we sit around the lovely coffee table drinking a lovely boozed up warm cider this time. And we are going to talk today about Rites of Passage. I am Margot.
And I am Maeve.
Gwen.
And I'm Brian. So, Rites of Passage was suggested, and we in the Grove have a couple of Rites of Passage we've discussed, but I don't think it's anything we have sort of organized and done yet. But all through paganism is a wide variety of various rites of passage, ceremonies, initiations, all sorts of stuff. What are some of your guys' experience?
I know we've
lead off?
talked about lately a fair bit about sort of croning rituals, because I think a few of us have reached that point where we're getting ready to go through that. But I tried to think, I think the only real rite of passage other than my own initiation would be first blood rites that I've participated in. I think that's probably my experience, not my own personal ones, but contributing to
It's funny you mentioned the croning, because as soon as I told my wife tonight's topic, she's like, "You let them talk about the mother maid and crone. Don't you have an opinion on that?"
Yes, I hit croning stage a while back. I think a lot of our cronings have been put on hold from COVID.
Well, for sure.
Because, you're not having all these big things. I've never actually been to, but I know, like, the baby naming, the baby blessing.
That's true.
I was all ready to have one. I was all planning it when I was pregnant 20 years ago, and my daughter, will have it, and I'll get the Unitarian Church, and we'll have a baby blessing. But then when she got to be about the right age, she was in the hospital and this and that, and everything just went down the toilet. That never ever happened.
We had a baby blessing for Atticus.
Yeah.
It was really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, so during our hand fasting wedding, we involved the tree, and the baby blessing involved the same tree.
That's really nice. I know this is going to sound really tacky, but I really, really wanted my daughter to wear the family christening dress. So I'm like, we've got to do something.
Does she still fit in it?
No, we have a family christening dress. It's beautiful, it's long, it's whatever. I wore it, we gotta have it.
Family traditions are important, and I remember I did officiate a few baby namings, baby welcomings, wickenings, like all sorts of names for them. And it was an interesting blend, because I would say these are like first generation pagans. So they have traditions, family traditions that are based on another religion. And so like a christening dress, or maybe a specific candle. The one I can think of was a Roman Catholic. The one that comes to my mind was they were previously Roman Catholic, and I don't know a lot of the christening elements in that ceremony, the basics, but there was definitely, they wanted these elements, like a specific kind of candle and to this and to that. And so I think the work was, how do you incorporate those traditions of those things that have meaning in a family way, but give them a pagan slant? So maybe they are the elements, when you're the water. So a christening, the water, and that could, and then the candles, the flames. So maybe you're pulling in elemental stuff. Maybe you're pulling in all of those kinds of things. It was, sort of a mental gymnastics to include traditions that are important to the family, but also how does this work in a pagan construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of your job when you're creating a ritual.
Oh, I had it all planned. It would have been beautiful.
Yeah, it would have been beautiful. So, at first you say, and I'm pretty sure you've been to a couple of baby namings, but
yes, now that I think about it.
We've also, Rites of Passage, we have sadly had memorial and funeral services for people in our community over the years. My own son had I've been to First Bloods, but he had a manhood ceremony.
We plan to do that for the Grove, because we've got too many boys.
Too many boys. Yeah. You're going to have to make a really good one up.
Yeah, so, and they're all there's 3 of them are practically the same age too, so
yeah. So that'll be interesting. We, at the time, we had access to a camping space that we all enjoyed off the grid, not a paid spot, not a campground sort of thing. It was on a local lake just outside of the city. There was a large island on it. So part of their initiatory process of coming into it was we paddled them out there and left them with minimal supplies to spend the night. And it was, I think it was May, which has the possibility of being a nice evening, but it was like the worst rainstorm ever.
Oh no.
We were on the mainland with tents and tarps and everything, and we were huddled and drunk and tipsy on good scotch, and they didn't even have matches. Like, we left them, they had to start a fire traditional ways, they had to do all these sorts of things. In the rain, the wind was horrible. They did have a tarp. Anyway, the thing is, they had this initiatory experience that was traumatic. There was 2 of them. Yeah, and they still will tell stories about it later.
I was thinking, I've heard stories, and your son takes great pride in those stories.
Yes,
he tells those
when
stories.
he tells those stories.
Yes.
So yeah,
it was formative for him.
Make great stories is one of those things. I remember on the way there, I said, Kyle's mom, she got him a present for this, so you're not getting a present, Edward, at the end of this. Like, after we go through this and, tomorrow morning, pack up and leave after you guys are done, when we come pick you up and everything, he's going to have this presentation of this lovely present, and you're not going to get anything. I fell down as a parent. I thought being a man was enough, and, really? Being a man, get used to it. There's not a lot of presents involved. You give a lot of presents when you're a man.
That's true.
And I said, but I feel kind of guilty. Is there anything you'd like? And he says to me, it's a manhood ceremony. And I said, yeah. He says, how about a 6-pack and a couple of hookers? And I'm like, yeah, no presents.
We're good. But it's funny, like, if he
How old was he, like 14 or something?
15. But he's fast, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate quick wit.
6-pack would have been so bad.
No, the 6-packs are not so bad.
Yeah.
A
But
couple of hookers. That's your
Hookers.
responsibility to get yourself a girl.
yeah.
Well, I've been at First Bloods. I've done I've married a couple of, I've been at pagan weddings, and I've actually married a couple people who, okay, we're going to go to the judge or whatever quick, but we want to have a pagan ceremony,
An actual ceremony.
a pagan, something meaningful for us, will you do it? And I'm like, oh, sure, we'll figure something out. I've done that.
So you guys keep mentioning first blood ceremonies, but no one's explained what a first
It's
blood
when a girl
ceremony is.
gets her period.
Well, I realize that, but you gotta tell
for
the
anyone
audience.
who's listening, okay. For anyone who's listening, it's when a girl gets her period.
Right.
Which I so badly wish was more celebrated or more celebrated.
Yeah, it wasn't just.
Because I was 11. I was traumatized and made fun of.
I was a month away from 12, and I had some girlfriends who already had it. But I do remember my mom saying to me, she said, because you have your period now, you have a huge responsibility to yourself. She says, you are not a woman yet, but she said, you are able to have babies now. You will be able to get pregnant, and you have a huge responsibility to respect yourself and not do that until you are much older. Remember her saying that?
That's for an 11-year-old.
Yeah, that discussion did not happen in my head.
No, it did because now they're teaching sex ed in school in the 4th, 3rd, whatever grade.
The sex ed that taught you that if you masturbated, the portal to hell would open up.
Well, I also
this was the 70s, and but my mother, and I mean, some girls were getting their period, not realizing they could even get pregnant now. But no, my mother's always very
I think that
open.
still happens today.
No, my mother was very, very, very open.
I just remember when we had that film in school that, they separated the girls.
Boys have to leave the room.
Boys went to the gym. They had
Play
their
basketball.
own film. No, they had a film too.
Our boys got to play basketball.
We were separated and were shown a film. And the film was made in the 60s. And I also remember the boys were done first and all snuck back and were peeking in through the window into the classroom. And I remember being so pissed off because now the boys knew all about us, but we had no clue about the boys.
Yeah.
And that pissed me
At
off.
least today they don't do any
No,
separation.
no, it's all
It's
together.
appropriately dated.
Well, hold up, you say that. That's how it is in Canada. In the States, I wouldn't be shocked if they're still split up.
Yeah.
I don't know though.
And from state to state, you're right. My first blood story is, you're right, it's the 70s. So, there's a lot of repression, and it's certainly not celebrated if it's referred to in any way. It's negative, and it's about
The curse.
pain, it's the curse, it's whatever.
Curse.
But also, I didn't read a lot of Stephen King, but I had read Carrie. And while you guys were 11, I was almost 17.
Really?
And I was so pissed off that I was not telekinetic.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, I have put my time in. Where is the flying buckets of blood? I'm ready. And it was really disappointing.
Well, yeah. I'm 11, and we're pre-peel and stick stage at this point. We're still with a belt.
Yeah, we're
For those of you who are much younger, you used to have,
Google that.
it was like stockings, but only with the sanitary pad. It was just this. I was late enough.
So
with
in a
stick,
sense, it was
peel
an
and stick.
initiatory experience in and of itself. Like, I can understand men really, that being a floating mark. Maybe getting your driver's license is I think for all children, especially like this, not so much now, I don't see it as being that way, but in the 60s, 70s, getting your driver's license was a passage into manhood. There was, or adulthood, whatever. There were certain stations where, maybe you could vote, maybe you could buy alcohol. There were different things that were designated adulthood. But we had a physiological change. I mean, here we are, many 40 years later, possibly for people, that more than 40 years later, and it's burned into your brain. I couldn't remember what my teacher name might have been, but those experiences are burned in your brain. It truly was an initiatory experience. So for different reasons, I think it's important for boys to have that coming of age ceremony, because it kind of does put a line there. But I think a rite of passage for girls puts that physiological change into context. They can wrap their head around it. It can have some meaning greater than pop culture.
And if you're lucky, you're surrounded by people who you trust, who are there to celebrate you.
Yes.
And what a great way to step into the next stage of your life.
Yes.
With all this support of all these wacky women behind you.
And having, your mother saying about respecting yourself, and having these connections of these women that were there for that ceremony, that if you didn't feel comfortable to talk to your mother, or things are coming up, you have this built-in multi-generational, because people that go to a first blood are anybody over the age of.
Yes.
So it's many generations.
My kid doesn't listen to this, so I'll tell it. My kid will never forget, because she started her period on grade 6 graduation day in her little dress, and she had cramps. I said, "You know what, honey? Why don't you just take this sanitary napkin and put it on just in case?" Because she'd been all cramped and upset, and she's like, "What is going on?" And she had this little cream-colored dress and whatnot. And I said, "You put that pad on just in case." And lo and behold, I don't know what, my spidey senses were tingling. And later that day, there it was. She doesn't listen to this. So
Aren't you glad you asked, Brian?
No, I understood what it was, but it's for our listeners. Now you had to suffer for all that.
I wonder how many fast forwards there were.
I actually, and this is something I don't know how many girls would celebrate with their mothers or whatever, but I think once we get a whole new generation, like when we get into second, third generation paganism, that I think that if teenage girls even, or when you're 20, whenever it might happen, even had and I think guys today, it's just a big high five. I think the losing of the virginity ceremony should be a thing.
I do too.
I think that's
really
where
do.
You're comfortable to share that with your
As long as it comes from a healthy point.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of girls wouldn't, if they're 16 or whatever the case might be, might not want to tell their moms because their moms might freak out. But if there's enough girls their own age, and guys, it's a big thing for guys. Good Lord, there's high-fiving and jumping up and down and bragging and all that. I suppose that's their ceremony.
But guys are under the impression that there's no consequences to their actions. Until
Yeah.
pitter patter of little feet, and they're like, oh,
Yeah,
what
it's
have I
a
got?
different. I do believe. I remember bringing that up with some people, and they looked at me like I had 27 heads. I said, "Oh, I was thinking of having one for my kid."
There you go. I wouldn't frame it losing virginity.
No,
I'd
because you're
frame
not
it
losing
being-
anything.
Yeah.
You're not losing
No, that's
anything.
true.
Yeah, I would frame it differently, but yes. And I mean, we've talked about a bunch of different, but this just reminds me really quickly, I'll interject this, that don't feel constricted when you're thinking about rites of passage. That's something else. We determine what things are of value on our life arc.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to a podcast, which I can recommend, not pagan, called What Could Possibly Go Right, speaking to a Native woman from the States. And she was mentioning that I believe it is in the Navajo that they have a rite of passage for baby's first laugh. So how beautiful is that?
That's
They
nice.
mark that, and it's a family, whatever, and there's a little ceremony for that. Isn't that beautiful? So what do you value? What stages in your...
when a baby walks, when a baby does.
You know, from a personal standpoint, as far as adulthood goes, I very clearly in my head remember the first major decision I made without discussing it with my mother first. Granted, it did not go over well, but I think that was sort of the first time I felt like an adult, I think. When I,
How did that feel? I'm still waiting. How did that feel? What's that like?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's
But
very
I
interesting.
very clearly, a clear memory of normally I would say, this is what I'm thinking, these are what are the options, what do you think, what's your opinion, you know, discussion. And this time I just thought, no, this is what I'm doing, I've made up my mind.
Yeah. Isn't that nifty?
And I'm prepared for the consequences.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
that adult
There's the
realization that, and
Yeah.
I'm prepared for the consequences.
It's a
That's
bit more
absolutely-
better than the millennial concept of becoming an adult where there's food in my fridge.
Yeah.
Oh, look, it's not just condiments.
I think both of you were at when my daughter started school at 5 years old. Do you
Mm.
remember being
Mhm.
at that? We had a ceremony and people came and everyone made wishes for her in school.
Yeah.
And that was a biggie because, you know, they're scared and but they're happy and they're this, and to have people.
And it is a
this and
huge
that.
change. It is a huge change where home is the locus of your support and
Mhm.
attention and importance, and you transition into the community
Yeah.
being more important to you.
Mhm. Yes, my mother actually said to me, she said, "Congratulations, you're now not going to be right all the time anymore."
Yes.
Because it will be teacher says.
Yeah.
She
And
says,
then,
"You are not right anymore."
and then
You're
very
not right all
soon
the time.
after that, it's my friends.
Friends say.
Yeah, the teacher has that few years, and then after that, it's not even a teacher.
So outside of like family rites of passage, how do we feel about, say, like group initiations, that sort of thing? Is that something prominent in the pagan community?
What kind of group initiation?
I don't know.
Well, I remember when I joined
Like various
your
covens. and
initial
such.
coven,
Oh, yes, you have a little welcome to the
Yeah,
blood. Yeah,
and
covens.
I did not, and I think I've discussed this with you before, that I had been invited to join this coven, and I had known a number of the all of the members, and worked casually with them in the past. So the Sunday afternoon that we were doing my official initiation into the coven, I walked in the door and there was somebody there I did not know. And they were also being initiated into the coven. And I had a little moment of, and then I had to stop and realize, I love and trust all of these people. I have to love and trust that they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that this is also a safe person.
Yeah.
But it took me a little while to,
Oh, really? I
Yes.
never thought of that.
yes, I did not know Grey Owl would
At all.
be there and had never met him before.
Really? You've been around the community for
No.
a long time?
No
God,
idea
that's a
who-
long time
Yeah,
ago.
it was a long time ago. I had no idea who he was. So that really caught me off guard. But it also taught me something very important about who
I'm
you
sorry
choose to
you were
work with.
discussed for a few
Yes.
minutes.
So, yeah.
And I'm kind of old-fashioned this way. If you have a coven, and I mean, there's open covens, there's closed covens, there's covens that are very secretive that people don't know about. There's this and that. I do think, for myself, it is a very sacred place, and it's also a very private place. Things often come up during, magical workings in your coven that, your spouse doesn't know about, or, other members of your family don't know about. So the thing is, I'm very, very myself, very big on the swearing to secrecy.
Right.
That's a biggie. When to me, that's one, like, we're welcoming you. We are trusting you with our secrets. And with the magical breakthroughs, often breakthroughs happen during magical times, and the swearing to secrecy, kind of idea that, now some covens aren't like that.
Right.
But for me,
our grove isn't very secretive, but we do have like a welcoming ceremony. We have 2 brand new members over the holidays that will end up, come the spring when it's a bit nicer, we'll end up having a welcoming ritual just for that.
Yeah,
sort of
welcoming rituals.
Yeah.
Going away rituals. People who are leaving or moving away at one time, and then this is not necessarily the happiest idea of a rite of passage. But at one point when I was in a coven, I was in way back before that coven, I had to leave that coven, and it was very, very important to me to sever my ties magically with them. So that was sort of another, ritual rite of passage. It's like, I have to leave this. I have to leave, because you become very, psychically, in a way, very spiritually connected. And that was a big thing for me, was to let that go. That was possibly one of the biggest rites of passages I ever did, was to
That
break
makes a lot of
tie.
sense. I'm not sure, so I don't want to speak about other religions, but my experience of other religions, such as it is, there isn't a ritual for the end of a marriage. But often within pagan traditions, there are rituals, or it's a common thing to have a group or a rite to sever that. Like you say, you're entwined. You're spiritually, emotionally entwined, and to make those breaks, right? And I think that's a wonderful thing that the pagan community champions for people.
I seem to remember burning my wedding dress in your backyard.
I do remember that. We had leave the past behind, and it was a wedding dress bonfire.
Yeah, it was a wedding. I did. Other people were leaving things behind, and I jammed my wedding dress from that.
I've definitely heard of that before, and there's a story of a couple. It's not a pagan story, but this couple at some point through their marriage, after 2 children, he had realized he was gay, and they decided to divorce. And instead of just divorcing and being done with, they had an unwedding, where they had like a big party, and it was the reverse of a wedding. They had a ceremony where they got drunk and ate cake. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a good time. If you could get the couple in the same room together with those best
in this case, they were still best friends. Sort of
They were
things.
still
Yeah.
good friends, and
Okay,
that's
good.
wonderful and mature.
That's
and everything
lovely.
else.
That's lovely. That wouldn't have happened in my divorce. I would have lost my mind. It was a very volatile time.
Yeah.
That's my wedding dress.
But exactly. But hopefully that burning that wedding dress and making some of those cuts helps ease that process.
Definitely helps. And oftentimes too, and speaking of the rites of, these different rites of passage, sometimes when, friendships end,
Mm-hmm.
or things like that, sometimes, you just can't. And we've all had friendships either run their course, maybe just run their course naturally, or maybe abruptly end. I think for those of us who are very involved with our spirituality, and maybe we're spiritually connected to the person, I think it is very important to formally in your spirituality sometimes. Yeah. This is sounding very, very negative.
It's healing and healthy, and
rites of passages work on both ends.
They work on both ends, yeah. Now, and this is just something that's been burning in the back of my head, because I really...
There must be a bonfire back there.
Don't be afraid of the outside of me. If you were in my head, you'd be terrified. But I've often thought that there are, when you have, say for a girl, I'm speaking specifically about girls, Brian, just for a reason here. You have their baby naming, it's a girl. And then you have their first blood. And then you have their marriage. And then and then you get back to a baby naming if that girl has a child. Because I feel that should happen as well. I don't feel the whole maiden, mother, crone. I think there's 3 phases to each one of those phases. I think there's 3 phases of motherhood. I think there's 3 phases of cronehood. I think there's 3 phases of maidenhood, because technically a 14-year-old girl. A 12, 11-year-old girl is technically in the mother phase because we can reproduce, but we are still maidens.
Yes.
So I think that even within that, the 3 phases of motherhood and even the 3 phases of cronehood, there should be different ceremonies as well. Like when you're in your menopause and your period is ended, well, that's the first phase.
Yeah.
And then there's the phase when you become a grandmother.
Yes.
And then maybe that phase when you're coming near the end of your life.
Yeah.
I think there should be, I'm very big on that sort of thing. I think there should be more recognition of that.
Right. As the middle-class white male, I of course need to give my opinion on this.
Okay.
But
let us have it.
I'm kind of come under the impression over the years from various books and listening to podcasts and stuff that it's the concept of maid and mother crone has been taken away a little bit from the physical and a little bit more into the mental and psychological.
I would agree.
You don't necessarily have to be a mother to be in the mother phase. You just have to be caring and communicative and
and all that. Yeah.
and wanting to give to the community, and where the crone phase maybe just wanting to pass on your knowledge to maybe whoever wants to listen, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like we are today.
But that way sort of it gets away from the genetic DNA gender stereotypes and moves more into more accepting and more open.
Well, they've always been more about archetypes than anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
never having gone through the mother crone, I often think of myself like I was a maiden and played that maiden role right up until I was like nearing 50. And then it was like, well, it's way too late for the mother stage, so I guess I'm going into crone now.
It's funny you say that because I view you very much as somebody who took care of the community for a really long time. That would have been your mother phase.
That's so funny.
And now you're a crone, you can hear that without you nauseous.
Yes. Because I can absorb that as helpful wisdom and knowledge.
As opposed to, oh my gosh.
I think that's too much responsibility for me.
I've often, and I'm not being patronizing here, I've often felt bad for guys don't have all these phases a woman has.
No, not so much.
I think it should be broken down a bit more. Maybe you don't have a wise sage, a father.
I've heard discussions on like
maybe
the youth and the hunter and the sage and that kind of thing.
It's not as formalized within paganism, but I remember when my father retired, and I don't know how many years ago it was, he retired early, lucky man. And so I went to a retirement ceremony with him. The family was asked us to speak, and of course I can't. If there's amplification, there's a lineup. Me and my siblings, we all had to have a little speech, and then all the other, his bosses and his co-workers and the people that worked for him. It was unending. Anyway, as I'm looking around, and there's a few hundred people there, and they had a meal and everything, and all these speeches and stuff, and I was like, you know what? My mother stayed home, and she had part-time jobs, and she went back to school, got her degree, but she was primarily at home. She was a teacher, but she didn't teach full-time or whatever. And I was like, but every bit of our family, every bit that she did was equally important as to what my father did, but there was no point of recognition in a non-pagan culture, right?
Yes.
For all that accumulated wisdom and all that she put into being a mother, so that transition from mother to crone. For my father, and I think people from that era, I don't think the same thing happens. I don't think anymore. This would have been the mid-90s when he retired, I would say. Early 90s. I don't think people put that much effort now into retirement parties for people,
I was going to say in the next 10 plus years, I don't think you'll ever hear a retired or anyone even retiring.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can't afford to. But I think that was, in the 20th century, that was the equivalent of a male croning. You transition from that, instead of like the hunter role, the outside support of the family, to the next stage.
I think part of that also may be that your father, my father, your guys' fathers, they had the same job for 40 years.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh
that
yeah.
doesn't happen.
100%.
I'm sure that's what Brian was insinuating. Is that, like,
That doesn't happen anymore.
No, it doesn't happen. My dad started, and he was a teacher as well.
Mhm.
He went his first day teaching and stayed in that school till he retired.
Oh,
Like,
my dad had a few schools, like as a principal, they moved him
But he
a
was a
few
principal.
places, but he was in the same board, the same school
yeah.
board, right?
No.
So,
People don't stay in the same place for 40 years. The same, factory or the same wherever
Office,
teacher, same
yeah.
office. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Weird.
in that time period, my father not so much. He was very family based, but a lot of men derive their sense of place from their job. If you don't have the same employer and you don't have that stability, I think men have to drive their sense of place somehow differently. So some kind of ritual from this active form of the correlation to the mother cycle, that male correlation to mother into sage, we're going to have to develop something more consistently the way we have over the years for women, because it needs to be recognized.
It's also, and this is another interesting thing, and I think it's a little weird that I even thought it, but when, and I've thought before that, say someone who had worked in the same place for 30 years, say they work, I don't know, wherever, and they work, with a bunch of guys, and they've been together for 30 years, and they see each other every day, and even if they're not best buds outside of work, these are the people they see every day, more than their family, and then all of a sudden, they don't see them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that must be more than the work. That must be very difficult.
Yeah.
For anyone, if you've been in one place a long, long time, if you've only been there 5 years, you're retired, you're 10 years, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you've been in some place for 40 years or something, and now you're retiring, how bizarre that must be for them.
Yeah.
Not to see, you might not miss some people,
Yeah.
and you might not miss getting up at 6.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
For a lot of people, when they reach that level of adulthood is when they realize, the vast majority of my friends now are going to come from work.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no other social outlet. There is no school. There is no.
yes, it is. It's very, and if you jump around a lot, every 5 years or so, you change jobs, 10 years, whatever it is now, it would be very, very different. You're not as anchored, I think. Hopefully you have a very stable family, and you're very,
Or friend. Yeah,
friend group, family friend group.
Family friend. Yeah.
and I did think about that. It's like, man, there are some people there. These are people you've been with every day for, for 30 years. It's like, this is so much, they all kind of grew up together. You go in there when you're 20, early 20s, and you're leaving 30, 40 years later. Very interesting.
So the last big rite of passage, we touched upon it very briefly earlier, is death. In paganism, death is much more accepted. It's not quite as terrifying as other.
I'd like to do in the future a podcast on pagan ideas about the after.
Yes.
The next slide.
But for me, in paganism, I think the rest of society is starting to move this way a little bit more. Our funerals aren't sad. They're celebrations of life. They're celebrations of the person.
That's become much more popular than the traditional dirge.
Oh my God.
The celebration of life.
You grew up in PEI, you have to do the casket, and then the whole family lines up, and you got shaken all the... Oh, it's the worst.
Following the coffin
Oh
and
my
the church
God.
as they roll it. It's, oh my God, the old-fashioned funeral.
It's so interesting because I think the very first funeral I had ever been to, I had to have been 19 or 20 before I even went to a funeral. And it was my grandfather's, who was a person I did not care for.
Right.
So
But did you have to stand in the family line?
I didn't do that.
No.
And I was more upset for the other people who were very upset.
Yeah.
My other relatives who were very upset. But I had a a weird relation, I guess, with death and funerals and things, because I missed the two sort of three most important ones in my life because I was still in the hospital.
Yeah.
So, I just had never been to a funeral. And I think Rhonda's mom's was the second funeral I went to.
Wow.
I haven't been to a lot of funerals. Maybe because that's not something I've had a lot of experience with, I've developed some weird ideas. I don't know. I just think in the Western world, we've sanitized death far too much. We've distanced ourselves from death far too much. we really don't want it to touch us personally in any
Right.
way. When my mom died and we went to do the official sort of identifying her body it wasn't an accident, like
Yeah.
the situation, but
Still
we had to go to the funeral home. I really would have liked to take part in the preparing her body and washing her body and being there for that.
Right.
And of course, that would never have been allowed.
No.
Right.
But I think that as a pagan person,
You would have.
I think that would have helped me send her onto her next journey in her life.
Well, the nice thing is, here in 2022, we have green burials now, and you can participate in that because you're not required to be embalmed anymore.
Right.
Like, embalming was meant for transporting people across the country. It wasn't meant for every body stuck in the ground.
Yeah.
So the idea, like, I've been to a lot of funerals. I've been to a lot of really bad funerals. Like, I think one of the reasons I sort of got on this train of wanting to be a death doula is that both, like, I buried both my parents, and both parents' funerals were incredibly Christian, Jesus-centric. I think the pastor said Jesus more than my dad's name. I don't think my dad ever stepped foot in the church.
Yeah.
They were not religious individuals in any way, and so their funerals didn't reflect who they were at all. And this is no one's fault. That's just how PEI is.
Well,
Now-
even here, I went to a funeral. A friend of mine died. He was 41 of cancer, and it was a terrible tragedy. He had 4 kids under 11. It was a terrible tragedy. And I went to this church in Dartmouth. It was an enormous church.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, wonderful guy. And the place was packed. And he was no Christian, and it was just all the stuff that was coming out of their mouth. It was a Catholic church. There was a statue of the Virgin Mary. I just stared at it the whole time.
Yeah.
And I said afterwards to his wife, I said, "What exactly was that?" She says, "That was for his mother."
Yeah.
That's
Well, and that's
people that are left.
Yeah, that's what they say
And-
is the funerals for who's left.
But his wife had no say basically in the funeral. His mother swooped in and did it when she was vulnerable. So we had a little ceremony later that was meaningful to her.
In my will, my funeral is very specified. Everybody who attends will be passed a Hawaiian shirt. You will be given a rum and coke or some sort of beverage. And as you approach the casket, you'll step on a plate and the strings will pull my body up and I'll go, yeah.
Well, isn't it?
You can cry, you can be sad all you want, but no. Get drunk and have fun.
Well, you know what? Isn't it interesting you say that? Because I've said forever and ever, I want a luau.
Yeah.
Toplessness is considered appropriate.
Yeah.
I want to roast a pig. I want everyone to
And then
drink on
literally
pineapples.
after that, I don't care what you do with the shell of my body. I don't want to say anything because he was joking, but there's an individual who runs a green cemetery here in Nova Scotia. He's like, yeah, you can just put them in the backseat of the car, pull up, we'll dig a hole, kick him in, you're done.
Well,
and it's like you don't have to get anyone else involved anymore. It's great.
I remember when people would start talking about what they want, planning their death or with their remains, and for a long time I'm like, well, I don't want to be buried because I'm afraid of the dark. Which is true.
I
never thought of that. And being cremated, that freaks me out. So at some point in my late 30s, maybe early 40s, I came across the idea that maybe I could be mummified.
Yeah.
But then I have not yet figured out what to do with me after that.
Well,
because then I become somebody else's problem.
But you know what? But you're a mermaid, burial at sea.
I suppose.
And now that I have a nephew, I hope to will my skull to him. Don't tell him. This will be just sort of like a surprise in the mail one day. What's this? Oh, it's your uncle's skull. You're stuck with it now.
On that note, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And you can send us any questions or comments. You can send it to our Facebook page and give us some thumbs up or stars or whatever it is that we're supposed to get. I'm the terrible one who seldom listens to our podcast.
I think on Spotify you can give stars.
You can give stars or whatever. And certainly we're always happy to hear from anyone if there's any questions or comments, or if you had a subject you'd like us to bring up, we're happy to do that.
3 Witches and a Druid podcast would like to take a moment to thank our amazing Patreon supporters. Today, we shout out to Danny, Tania, Sarah, Lore, Kay, Linda, and Jennifer. Without your generous support and contributions, we couldn't bring you this magical content, and we thank you for listening.
So until next time, everyone, merry meet,
Merry heart.
and merry meet again.
Blessed be.
This has been 3 Witches and a Druid podcast. Thanks for listening.